You are listening to the Outright Proud podcast. I'm Hazel Olsendorf, and I'm on the communications team here at Outright International. At Outright, we work together for better LGBTIQ lives. This podcast will advocate, celebrate, amplify, and support LGBTIQ voices. Our guest today is Outright's Senior Program Officer and part of our United Nations team, Luiza Veado, here to talk to us about the very unique position we hold at the United Nations, which I think is pretty much unparalleled by any other LGBTIQ NGO. So we're going to jump right in. Luiza, hi.
Hi, Hazel. Thank you for having me here today.
Of course. Thank you for being here. I've been working at Outright for over a year now, and I'm still sort of unsure about what exactly the United Nations does, and quite honestly, the extent of what we do there. So let's start at the beginning. Walk me through it. What is the United Nations, and why is it important?
Well, I think that this is not a one-year person question. I think a lot of people who work with the United Nations for a really long time still don't know what the United Nations is, so no shame. I think it's really important for us to visualize historically what the United Nations is. When everything happened, World War II, everything that was happening around the globe, member states, which are countries really, needed a space to have conversations and to decide on things. People suddenly realize that we live in a globe and that we have all these countries and all these people, and that everything that we do in one corner of the world affects what happens in the other corner of the world. So these conversations need to happen, right? And where were we going to have those conversations? We didn't have a space. We had something called the League of Nations that kind of flopped, to be very honest. And then we created what is now the United Nations, which is a place where 193 countries, which is a really big number, come and have conversations about all the pressing issues globally. So in the end of the day, I think that we all read the news and it says, the United Nations decided that. The United Nations is not a person. It is a space where we all congregate and have conversations, and the major political decisions are made, financial decisions, small things like international mail is decided at the UN, but also things like how are we going to give humanitarian aid to this country who's in famine right now? So I think it's a space that we all have these conversations. And by we, I say we because we all make our own countries, and we are part of our countries, and our countries sit together in this space to have those conversations. And it matters because I don't think that if we put all the countries today in a room and said, let's create a space to have a conversation, that they would actually say yes. So we cherish this space that has existed where everyone, and when I mean everyone, is from the United States to Tuvalu, to Zimbabwe, to Turkey. Everyone is there. And everyone who's not there kind of wants to be there because it gives you that status as part of the conversation, right? So that's kind of what the UN is. And then we could go on details and talk all the charters and different things, but then that's for nerds like me.
So now that we know a little bit more about what the United Nations does, can you help me understand what Outright does at the UN? How would you describe it to someone who doesn't know anything at all about the UN?
Outright has something called an ECOSOC status, which is the entry seal to be part on the UN spaces and in UN conversations and all these different things. And we're the only LGBTIQ organization in the US and based in New York that has the seal of participation, which means that we're the only organization that is sitting here all year round following these conversations that the 193 countries are having. And we're participating and just reminding them, like, hello, did you remember that LGBTIQ people live lives too? that we need to eat food, that we need access to services, that we need to participate in elections, that we do not deserve to have our rights violated, that when we talk about everyone, we actually mean everyone and not just part of the world. So what we do is something of a watchdog. We're there. We're reminding them that we exist sometimes. We're reminding them that there are very specific issues that we're the only ones that know. But also, we're opening the doors for other partners, right? So getting the seal of approval takes a really long time. And you can count in both of our hands together how many LGBTIQ organizations do have that seal. And what we do is bring other organizations, some who are trying to get that seal, some who didn't even know they needed that seal. And we're having conversations like this one that we're having right now on why is it important that they also participate. Because I do not speak, and Outright does not speak for the whole movement. We're part of a movement. We move on, the movement continues. So I think it's so important that we do this knowledge sharing and this space opening with the opportunity of not only the expertise that we have, but also with the relationships and the understanding and the credibility that we bring as an organization.
Thank you. Wow, that's awesome. So in Outright's early days, almost 30 years ago, we focused on pushing the mainstream human rights movement itself, which included the UN, to see sexual orientation and gender identity as reasons that some people were persecuted and denied their basic human rights. How would you describe how our work at the UN has changed over time?
For me, it's funny because you saying, oh, we did this work 30 years ago, and what do we do now? We still do this, and I think it's important to say it because change, especially in spaces like the UN, come over time. I like to tell everyone that the UN is like bureaucracy times 193. So every time I meet someone, I say, you know how long it took you to get your ID or your driver's license? And the bureaucracy, and then you forgot the yellow copy, and then you didn't pay the $10. So imagine that, but that you actually had to do it for 193 countries. And that's kind of the pace of the UN. So we're still doing similar things, but I think that if you look back on where we were 30, 33 years ago and where we are now, even the instance that we are having conversations about LGBTI issues is new. Member states wouldn't talk about LGBTI issues. The opposition, those who don't believe in our rights, would even talk to us. And now they actually have to come out with responses and they actually have to be in the room. We do different kinds of events. Member states do work with us. We were one of the founding of a group of LGBTIQ supporters at the UN called the UN LGBTI Core Group 15 years ago. And now we have 42 member states. So we see that the conversation is still on violence and discrimination most of the time, but the conversation has shifted on having a more intersectional approach. And that comes from us as Outright as well. Because I think it's so important when we have these conversations in solidarity and together with other groups, because we are part of these groups too. We are part of the disability rights movement. We're part of the religious minorities group. We're part of the youth movements. We're part of the women's rights and feminist movements. We're part of racial equality movements. We're not just LGBTIQ people. We are multifaceted people who participate in different spaces. And I think the more we showed up for them, the more they showed up for us as well. And I think that right now, the biggest difference that we see is that there's no turning back. The UN has already came out with so many documents and different things, and you have some countries and some organizations who will come and say this doesn't exist, but it's too late now. Now they actually have to come out with arguments and have conversations, and it's impossible. right? Because everyone has rights. And if everyone has rights, why don't we have rights? And then we stop talking about just violence. And then we start talking about having access to school. And then we talk about having access to housing. And then we talk about health, and we talk about sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I think that we slowly moved from the violence and discrimination, and we never left it. But we moved into these broader conversations because at the end of the day, we're not just trying to get everyone to survive. We're trying to get everyone to live their best lives and to do everything that they can do and that they want to do, and be actually able to do it. And again, 193 bureaucrats, really hard, but slowly but surely we see more and more things happening in a different pace, but in a solid pace. And for me, it's very exciting because I've been doing this for 10 years, and in 10 years, it's palpable. The difference is palpable. But the problem is that every time you take 3 or 4 steps ahead, then you have 3 or 4 more steps that you need to take. And it's kind of like chasing the horizon. There's always more to do, but there is empirical evidence that we are winning.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's just say that suddenly something really weird happens and the United Nations just like bloop, stopped existing. Everything else is normal, but the UN is gone. What are a few things that people would miss if the UN suddenly just didn't exist?
Well, first of all, things would not be normal. As you know, the word fun would stop existing if you didn't have the UN. But also, everything that we see as life today in a globalized, open world, like an open society, would be non-existent. I like talking to people about this because I get that a lot, right? I'm a lawyer, and lawyers usually say that what I do is not law, and that why would you work with the UN? And they come and I ask them, so what do you do? What kind of, lawyering do you do? And people go, oh, I work with migration and refugees. And I'm like, did you know that the UN created the concept of refugees and it didn't exist before that? They go like, And did you know that there is a specific treatment for LGBTI refugees because the UN created a protocol? They go, well, and it is always like that. Even when I was mentioning before, even sending a letter to your friends who do not live in the same country as you, the postal system internationally was created by the UN. Where boats are supposed to be, what you can fish, what kind of housing can you create in different spaces, passports, entering different spaces. So if the UN didn't exist, I think that honestly, they would have to create something like that. Because we would still have the regional system, so all the countries in the same region would talk to each other. But then again, isn't it more fun when we can talk to more people and have the different conversations? So I think life without the UN would be kind of sad. But don't tell the UN I told you that.
That's perfect. Thank you. Yeah, wow. There are young people like me, I'm 24, out there who don't really relate to the UN. It feels very far away from our everyday lives. Can you help me visualize what the UN is doing for young queer people like me all over the world?
Yeah, I think that the UN is very far away for everyone. When you think about the UN as one monolith thing that you can't reach, right? It's in New York, it's this major building, a lot of security, passes, when in reality, it's a lot more than that. If you think about, for instance, UNICEF, UNICEF is in 193 countries, so you don't need to actually be in New York to access UNICEF. And they are doing work on mapping the rights of LGBTIQ youth and children right now, and doing some work on figuring out what they can do. And I think that the UN is a kind of bureaucracy, but it's a nice bureaucracy that is trying to figure out solutions that would make lives better for everyone around the globe. And I think that when we understand that, and we understand the political power that the UN has, but also the financial power, and how, yes, it has a lot of issues and it has a lot of mistakes, but also it is the system that we have right now and we should be taking advantage of it. I think that what the UN is doing for young people is opening doors, and opening doors in spaces that might not be the safest or nicest ways that they're living, or safest spaces with even their own families, their communities. They're trying to follow a human rights-based approach. And I think it's very similar to when young people ask me about, oh, why would I get involved in politics? Or why would I know what politics are doing? And I find it very funny because it affects your life, and it's going to affect your life longer than mine. So you should actually know what's happening, and you should know the tools that are happening, because they affect not only your life, but everyone else's, right? Us as a collective, human beings and humanity. And I think that getting involved with the UN, despite being so difficult, and that's, again, why we open as Outright doors for other, not only youth, but new people in the space, because you don't necessarily need to be youth to be new in a space. The tools to come to this space and to be able to influence the policy, to know what's going on, because knowledge is power, to participate, to sit at the table and not look from afar and not be named. Because there is space. The problem is it is very tangly and difficult to get there. And the more people we get, the easier it is. And also, like, young people, if you're listening to this, go change the UN, go make it better, change the things. We're doing what we can, but the more people we get, the easier it is to change it. But we can't change something we don't understand. We can't deal with tools that we don't know how to use. Like, a hammer is useless if you don't know what to use it for. But if you do, then it has a million ways that you can use it. So I think it's the same thing. See the UN as a hammer. You can destroy things. You can put a really cool piece of art on your wall. Or it could be something that you never pick up, and then you have a tool that you never actually learn how to use.
Wow. Okay. That was amazing. So is there anything that I forgot to mention, or anything else that you feel is relevant to this conversation that hasn't been mentioned yet?
Well, I think that this conversation could last really, really long time. There are university courses that last 6 years that people study just this, that we're having this conversation. But I think that the most important thing that perhaps we haven't talked about is that we need to demystify the spaces of power, because spaces of power like the UN are our spaces. They were built by LGBTIQ people. They couldn't be out back in 1945, but they can be out now. There are queer people making those decisions now, and we need to support them. And we need to support ourselves to be able to come to these spaces. And I think the more we share the knowledge, the more we're interested on things, the better it is. And I know it sounds very far away and very difficult and very boring if you're not a nerd like me. But take a chance and, watch a YouTube video about the UN. Come to our website and read what we're doing. Come to one of our events. There's a million events we did and recorded and are on our YouTube page. Learn about the different programs that we have if you want to get involved. Just get curious and excited. And I always tell everyone about this, that If I ended up learning how to find my way through the UN, that's so can you. Because I didn't know how to do it when I first started, and here I am doing it every day. So just try, and I think you will be pleasantly surprised on what you can do and what you can learn and the amazing things that people are doing in these spaces.
Well, Luiza, thank you so much for being here and helping shed light on Outright's work at the United Nations. If you want to support what Outright does or learn more about our work at the UN and elsewhere, visit us at outrightinternational.org. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We're going to be Outright, INTL, all one word, on all platforms. I'm Hazel Olsendorf, and thanks for listening to the Outright Proud podcast. I'll see you in the next one.